All right, so for our latest project, we're going to be taking a look at this Onkyo Integra Integrated Amplifier. This is model A-807, and this unit comes from my friend's shop. He said someone brought this in, set it on the counter, and said, don't know anything about it, don't have any interest in it, it's yours, you can do whatever you want with it. So we made the decision that I would take this one, and we would find out what's wrong with it, get it fixed, and put it up for sale and split the money. While I was there, I did hook this up to power, and it did come out of Protect when I turned it on. So at the very least, we don't have one or more channels blown apart in it. So we got that going for us, but whether or not there's anything else wrong with it, we'll be finding that out together. As you would guess, very heavy, bulky, nice integrated amplifier from back in this time period. And as always, we'll come in, we'll take a look at the controls and the knobs they provided on the front, as well as the connections in the back of the unit. As for our intro music this time, going back to 1984 for Dio's masterpiece follow-up to Holy Diver, The Last in Line. And of course, any song on this could be the best one. We're just going to take a little bit of a listen to one of my favorites. This one's called Breathless. So let's check out a little bit of this, and then we'll get started on the Onkyo. All right, let's pick back up and we'll take a quick tour of the controls and switches they provided on the front of the unit. Starting on the far left here, we do have a momentary power switch. To the right of that appears to be an IR window. Obviously would indicate it's a remote control unit, or at least remote to some degree. Below that, your speaker selector, which is off, A speakers, B speakers, or combined for A and B. 1/4-inch headphones jack, of course. Bass and treble controls to the right of that, and then a balance control. And up above, you're going to get your input selector. They give you quite a few here. Tape 2, Tape 1, DAT, or digital audio tape. I believe that was a thing for about 6 months back in the day. Phono, tuner, CD, auxiliary 1, and auxiliary 2. To the right of that, you do get a very large weighted volume control. You can tell there's some drag on that, so needless to say, that is part of the remote control. You get an attenuator on and off, as well as a subsonic filter. And to the right of that is the stereo or mono mode switch. And then up above, you're going to get source direct. It says either direct tone, tape 1, or tape 2 monitor. Below that, you get a record out selector. It's going to give you DAT tape 2 to tape 1, DAT to tape 1 and tape 2, off, and then source. And then to the right of that, a cartridge selector. And that seems to be about it. There is a light there for indicating if it's in direct mode. Of course, bypassing the tone, I believe, is what that's all about. So give me a second here. It's quite heavy, and we'll flip it around and we'll take a look at the connections provided in the back. All right, let's pick back up from the rear of the unit and we'll take a look at the connections for all of our input sources. There's a main bank here that has tape 2, tape 1, and DAT, and those are labeled record and play versus input and output. To the right of those, we have CD, auxiliary 1, and auxiliary 2. Right up above, we have some 3.5 remote control options where you can jack one of your components, whether it be a tape deck. This one is labeled phono. This one over here is labeled RI. This could probably be a CD player or a tape deck, and that unit could be controlled with the remote that came with this unit. Right below our main bank of jacks here, we do have the tuner input as well as the phono, and there is a ground lug for your turntable's ground wire. Not much else to see. We have 4 binding posts for speakers A and 4 for speakers B. And then they're going to give you 3 outlets here, and they are all switched according to what's written here. Surprisingly enough, no preamp out, main in on this one. That is a little disappointing to me, but again, it is a very powerful amplifier. You can tell that by looking at the outputs through the top of the unit. So maybe they assumed you wouldn't need an additional amplifier if you have this unit. So I guess the first thing we probably want to do, let's go ahead and get the lid off and let's just take a quick visual inspection of it. Like I said, when I powered it up, it did come out of protect, but we're not going to just take that as the gospel and hook some speakers up and start right away. Let's take a look at things, and then from that point, we'll get it hooked up and meter the outputs and see if we have any DC offset there. So give me a moment for that, and we'll pick back up. All right, let's come back in and we'll go ahead and take a look at the inside, do a quick visual inspection here. We'll start over here in the power supply, noticing the very large filter caps. Onkyo branded, it looks like 12,000 mic at 63 volts there. Onkyo branded transformer. And then you got your standby power supply here, and they put a small transformer there for that. And then a relay, of course. Amplifier right in the center, and not much to talk about. The minimal components that you would probably need for this: SANCAN outputs, 2SC 3857, as well as a 2SA 1493. I would say probably 100, 125 watts per channel, somewhere in that neighborhood. Taking a look up front, we can see the motor for the volume control. We've got a few other switches and wires here. Then when we get towards the back, we have a second motor coming into this assembly, which would be the input select. So I would assume that your remote control for this will have way more functions for other components, CD player, tape deck, phono, whatever. And for this, all I can see is input select, volume, and power. Did not get the remote control with the unit, but I do have a URC MX350. We'll program for this and find out what it'll do with the remote. All right, let's go ahead, and I'm gonna get a multimeter involved. We'll set that up on the outputs and see if we have any DC there that we need to be concerned about. And then from that point, we will fire it up and see what it sounds like. So give me a second for that. I'll pick back up with you. All right, as we come back in, I went ahead and got the unit plugged in, and it is turned on at this point. And we'll just go into the right channel here and see if there's anything we need to be concerned about. Doesn't appear so. And then the left channel, speakers A, nothing there. Let's make sure it is switched into the A speakers, and I believe it is. Yeah, it looks like we're good there. All right. I think we know enough about it. Let's hook up some speakers and let's see what this thing will do. So give me a second for that. All right, let's pick back up. Got some speakers hooked up to it, and it is bumping along pretty good here. It is loud, as you would imagine. Only at about 10 o'clock there, and you can tell it wants a lot more than that. When When you switch the inputs on this, I hear the speaker relays are actually kicking out, and then they kick back in once you land on the input you want. And if you take a look back here at this motor in particular, the back part of it right here, when I move the input, you'll see that motor start to advance that switch. You hear just the slightest bit of static in that attenuation switch. But one thing I did notice when I was flipping back and forth between these inputs, when it came back, when the speaker protection relay kicked back in, I only had one side until I turned the volume up. So I bet you we have, you know, tarnished connections on that speaker relay. It wouldn't be an issue if you had the volume up loud, but I had the volume down real low when that happened. And there is a second, if I turn the speakers all the way off, there's a second relay that clicks too. And it's up here in the front panel. You can tell it's behind this front panel. That might be the one that actually gets the motor moving, and then once it makes it to position, it cuts itself off. I'm guessing totally on that, but it seems to correspond to the movement of that motor. Well, I think we're going to have to clean that switch anyway, so we probably should go ahead and get the front plate off of it. But before we do that, let me get a remote and see if we can find out if the remote all works and what it will do with the remote. It looks to me like it's going to be power, volume, and source. I don't see any motors on anything else, so very loud. Not even getting warm, barely. All right, let's get a remote control involved and see what will happen as far as the remote functions are concerned, make sure all that works. It looks like we have some switches to clean up. I don't hear any noise in any of the bass, treble, or balance. I don't hear any noise in the volume, but I do hear the slightest bit of static in this attenuation, so maybe hitting these three here might not be a bad idea. And definitely taking a look at that relay. So give me a second for that and we'll pick back up. All right, let's go ahead and we'll pick back up. I was able to get this MX350 programmed up for the unit, and what I'm finding here is there is a discrete command for each one of the inputs, as well as the volume control and the power and muting. Unfortunately, the power is a power toggle. There is no discrete on and no discrete off for this. But it does work just fine, so we'll check it out here. I do have it in mute at the moment. And there is no volume indicator LED on this one, as there are on so many others. But it is kind of cool to watch it shift inputs. And there is a discrete one for pretty much every function on it. So that's kind of cool. One thing I did notice about this, I pulled up the service manual, and it is available on HFE in case you would find yourself needing it. The relay behind the front panel is not for the motor. It is for the headphone jack. So for whatever reason, they do not want any audio passing out of this thing when it's in transition from changing from one input to another. Maybe for fear of some type of noise, or maybe there is some type of noise that occurs when that's going on. I'm not sure, but that is kind of the way that they have it all arranged in the circuit. So let's go ahead and get the front panel off of this thing and get that. Hopefully that'll give us a little better access to that attenuator switch, and we can get that cleaned up. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that relay they have there and see what type they used. And then we'll move on from that point to getting the speaker relays out and getting those cleaned up. I have not been able to duplicate that problem again where it dropped to one side, but I'm quite sure that's probably where that was coming from. So we'll move on from this, and I'll pick back up with you once I got the front panel off, and we'll take a look. All right, let's go ahead and come back in. It's been a few days since I made the last clip, but I did get the front panel off of the unit. Had to take a few screws out of this circuit board here that has the IR receiver, the power switch, and a couple of LEDs there. And right behind the volume control, you can see there's a blue relay they use to cut the headphones in and out as you're switching through the functions of the unit, through the inputs. I'm going to get a little bit of help on the attenuation button, but not a lot. It looks like I might be able to go underneath the switch. I filed down the tip of that straw for my control cleaner to where it's really got just a pretty tiny needle tip on it. So I should be able to shoot some back in there and get that cleaned up. So I think we'll do that first, and then we're going to move on to the speaker relay situation, and I'll bring you up to speed on what I have found out about that. And we'll get on the road to getting this one mopped up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean this switch up. Then we'll fire it back up and see if we've made any difference in it. It wasn't real bad, but if I could get that tiny amount of static out of it, I'd feel a little bit better about that. So let me go ahead and work on that real quick, and then we'll move on to the speaker relays. All right, let's go ahead and pick back up. I was able to get a little bit of the MG Chemicals Super Contact Cleaner into this attenuation switch. Just kind of pressed up on it a little bit and put the very tip of that nozzle on the bottom of this and blasted some control cleaner in it. Made a little bit of a mess, but I cleaned all of that up, and it was able to get that static out of there. So it is working with no issues now. None of these other controls, whether it be the volume, balance, tone controls, input select, no static, no intermittent dropout of any kind on those. So I decided that I would leave those alone. It doesn't break my heart that I didn't have to take that input select switch apart and clean it. It is very doable to remove that assembly, the motor assembly, and break it all down. Of course, you would have to take it out of the board to do that, most likely. But I'm, again, not brokenhearted. I didn't have to do that. So we'll pick up on the speaker relay thing. And a couple of weeks ago, when I left off on making the video, I decided to take a look at one of the relays that was in this unit. And when I received this amplifier, the only thing I found wrong with it during the initial testing of it was every time you make an input selection, go between one input and the other, both speaker A and speaker B protect relay will open briefly, and then once it lands on the input that it wants, it'll close back, obviously to allow sound back out to the speakers. But when I was selecting between the inputs, I had the volume down real low, and upon the relay kicking back in, I had one channel but not the other. And so I decided the first thing I would do was just go over to the relay and just kind of tapped on it a little bit, very slightly, and that channel came back. And so I experienced the same problem with that Pioneer VSX 9700S I did the 3 videos on that I use here in my garage. It was doing the same thing. Upon low volume, or even turning the unit off and turning it back on, sometimes the one channel would drop. And over time, those connections on those relays, the contacts will get a little dirty, and therefore, if you don't have a strong enough signal going through it, it won't make a good enough connection to allow sound to pass back out. And in this particular case, every time you change inputs, the contacts open and close with a load on it since your speakers are hooked up. So it's not surprising that this one would have that issue. So I went ahead and pulled one of these relays out. I got to looking at it. I noticed that it wasn't an Omron relay, but I still thought I might be able to take it out of the case. But in this particular case, they're sealed in it. They're sealed in the enclosure, and they only give you access to remove the top of it. And so I got to looking at that, and even though it is probably doable to clean these contacts, I just don't like the fact that I can't get, I can't get an eye on it all the way around outside of this case. And trying to mess with it through the top here, there's a couple of plastic pieces right there. I don't want to risk breaking anything off or misforming those contacts. All it would take is for you to slightly bend one of them, and then you may have an even worse case of sound dropping out. So I decided what I would do is going to search looking for new ones. If you run this number through the internet, 12 MBU, doesn't come back with a lot of hits. So I started searching, and I did find these. There's under the name of Potter and Brumfield. They consider these, or Brumfield, I guess. This model number of this relay is an RKA-7DZ12. And in my opinion, this is the exact same relay that this is. The only difference is that this one is under that name of Potter and Brumfield. But the specifications are identical, and we'll look at those right next to each other. They even look exactly the same. But the contact ratings is exactly the same as the one that came out of the unit. Let's see, we'll flip it over. And they are verbatim the same. So these are the two we're going to use. These are brand new. We're going to change both the A speaker relay and the B speaker relay. I did plug up some headphones. I didn't have any cutting out in the headphone jack, so we're not going to mess with that relay. But these two would be the most important ones for your speakers. And I would venture to say, maybe even wager a little money, that the B speaker relay in this unit is probably not bad. Doubtful that there was a second set of speakers even used with this. Maybe, but probably not. And so if there wasn't, then the chances are pretty good that relay never experienced any type of a load on the contacts that would have created a problem. But either way, we're going to replace both relays just to be sure, since we're going to be selling this unit. So I'll go ahead and get you set up overhead, and we'll go ahead and get these, get the other one out of this and get these two new ones installed. And we'll get on the road to getting this thing wrapped up. All right, let's go ahead and come back in. I got you set up. We're looking at the bottom side of the unit, obviously, solder side. And we'll pull out that second relay. There's some wires here that are in the way, so I got some jumper clips kind of pulling those away from the site that I'm trying to work in. So we'll just use some solder wick, kind of draw them out with that. Let's trim that off a little bit. The other one was pretty easy to get to. This one, because of where those wires are routed, it's a little more difficult. Of course, this is the contact side, obviously right, left, or vice versa. And then in the back end here is the coil. And even though I've got a good look at the coil connections, I don't think the camera, based on this angle, will allow you to see that, but there's two for the coil. Yeah, it looks like the angle of the camera kind of makes it look like I'm burning the wires apart. So that should do it. That should drop right out. And it did. So now putting the other two in. I'll tell you what, let me pause the video. I'll pick the amp up, get one side of each one soldered in, and then we'll finish it up. Give me 1 second for that. All right, we'll go ahead and pick back up. I went ahead and just tacked up one terminal of each of the 2 relays. I've got the front of the unit propped up on something, so what we're going to do is, this is the relay for speakers A, and you can get to this one really easily. So I'm just going to come in here, again trying to avoid the wires, don't want to burn those up. But before we commit, I'm reaching underneath, and I'm going to push on the housing of that relay, and I'm going to make sure that it's pushed up the way it's supposed to be. And then we'll finish up the other connections. Sorry about that. And that takes care of that one. We'll go ahead and fill that hole back up with solder. And now we'll move down to the other one, which is a little tougher for you to see, especially with those wires in the way. Let's see. Again, the distance between the wires and the contact points that I'm soldering on, they look very close, but they're not. So I'm just going to move those kind of out of my way a little bit. At the very least, I can get to one of the back contact points. And again, I do realize that you're kind of, unfortunately, at a visual disadvantage here because you can't see what I'm seeing. I'm pushing up on the bottom of the second one just to make sure that the housing is in the right place that I want it to be in. There we go. That's good. And then we'll finish it up. And then for the one in the very back, let's see. Let me bring in a second jumper clip just to kind of pin this wire out of my way. That should be good enough. And I can slide right in there. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way, the next step here, I'm going to go ahead and lower this back down. Pull the jumpers off of everything. This is an optional step. I do this a lot in my videos. I have a tendency to go behind myself and clean up the flux that kind of makes the circuitry look messy after I've done work in an area. This would work perfectly fine without you doing this. So, again, an optional step. then speaker B relay. I did buy a couple extras of those 12-volt relays just in case I run across those again. I won't have to spend the time to do the research. I will already have the part installed. All right, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead, I'll get it flipped back over and we'll try it out and make sure it works as expected. So give me 1 second for that. All right, let's go ahead and pick back up. We'll take a look at the relays installed. And they are looking very nice in there. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know, I would suppose, since they're fairly identical to the ones that were in there to begin with. Only difference is there is kind of a white bead around the top of the new ones, whereas there is no bead here. So, but I think we're going to be just fine. Of course, when I was initially messing around with this, that was the only thing that I ran across, is switching between inputs would sometimes drop that one channel out when the volume was low. And not a problem that would be exclusive to this. Like I said, I had the same problem with that Pioneer VSX 9700 I did. And this could happen to pretty much any one of these type of units that use this type of relay. The contacts can get dirty enough to where you just can't get a signal through it under low volume, but once you start pushing it a little bit, then all of a sudden you can get your volume back. So let's go ahead and put the lid on this unit and get this one wrapped up and get things finished. All right, so as we pick up one last time, taking a final look at this very nice old Onkyo Integra integrated amplifier, model A-807. As always, I want to thank you guys very much for checking out the video, as well as all the videos on the channel. It's taken a while to get this one completed. I've been quite busy around here in my garage trying to get customer units caught up so I could start on my own personal projects. I have a couple of video things that I'm dying to start working on. But the delay in waiting for the relays in this is really what was the thing that delayed the video the most. But now that we got this wrapped up, this thing will go on my friend's observation bench at his shop, and we'll run this for a while, making sure there isn't anything that's going to show up down the road after it being in use for a while. So when I started out this video, I believe it was about the time the documentary film Dreamers Never Die, Ronnie James Dio's documentary film, was released. And so I had purchased a subscription to Showtime so I could see it. Now, fast forward down the road a little bit, that documentary is already on YouTube. You can watch it and not have to pay anything for it. But if you're a fan of his, I absolutely recommend seeing this documentary, if nothing more than for the story of how they came up with the album cover for Holy Diver, how they went out on location and filmed someone in that pre-suit in the ocean. And it's amazing how that came to be. And some of the other stories, things about him I did not know, especially earlier in his life. Just a great documentary about a true musical genius as far as writing and as far as his voice is concerned. So when we started the video, of course, we were using the Last in Line album, and so we're going to finish on that album as well. So on our way out, let's check out one of my favorite songs from this, called Mystery.